March 1945, Germany. Captain Edward Colton stood in front of his company and said 3 words no officer is ever supposed to say. "I won't go!" 140 men stared at him. These were his men, soldiers who'd followed him through France, who trusted him to lead them through a German town crawling with enemy positions. And their captain had just refused the order to attack. The battalion commander, Colonel Frank Gruber, was standing 30 feet away. He heard every word. So did every soldier in the company. A captain, refusing a direct combat order in front of his own men. What Gruber did next would set off a chain of events that ended with Patton standing face to face with a broken officer and delivering a response that no one in that room ever forgot. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the stories about World War II that reveal what really happened when men reached their breaking point, and what came after. The town was called Hammelburg, small, fortified, sitting on a hill with clear sightlines in every direction. The Germans had dug in, machine gun positions, mortar emplacements, and a company of Wehrmacht infantry that had no intention of retreating. 3rd Battalion had been ordered to take it. The plan was straightforward. 2 companies advance from the south, 1 from the east. Squeeze them, break them, move on. It was supposed to take half a day. Captain Edward Colton had command of Baker Company, the eastern approach. He was 29 years old, a school teacher from Connecticut before the war, commissioned through OCS in 42. He'd been competent, not brilliant, not flashy, but steady. His men respected him. He made decisions, kept casualties low, brought people home. But that was before the Hurtgen Forest. Baker Company had gone into Hurtgen with 180 men. They came out with 74. 6 weeks of fighting in a frozen forest where you couldn't see the enemy, where artillery shredded the treetops and turned timber into shrapnel, where men died next to you, and you couldn't even retrieve their bodies because the ground was mined. Colton lost his executive officer on the 3rd day, lost his best platoon sergeant on the 5th, lost a kid named Danny Whitford, 19 years old, who'd been writing letters home to his mother every single night. On the 14th day, a tree burst got him. Colton was standing 6 feet away when it happened, close enough to feel the concussion, close enough to be covered in someone else's blood. After Hurtgen, they rebuilt. Replacements came in, new faces, new names. Colton trained them, drilled them, prepared them. He did his job, but something behind his eyes had changed. The steadiness was still there, but it was mechanical now, going through the motions. His first sergeant, a veteran named Roy Kessler, noticed. Kessler had been with Colton since Normandy. He knew the man, and he could see the cracks forming. "Captain, you all right?" "I'm fine, Top." "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." Kessler didn't push it. You didn't push officers, not about things like that. A man either held together or he didn't. You couldn't fix it with a conversation. The order came down at 0400. Take Hammelburg. Baker Company advances from the east at 0600. Colton read the order, studied the map, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. The eastern approach was a killing field, 300 yards of open ground leading to a stone wall. Behind the wall, buildings. Inside the buildings, Germans with machine guns. Any company crossing that ground was going to take casualties. Heavy casualties. Colton ran the numbers in his head. He'd done this 100 times before. How many men would make it across? How many would get cut down in the open? He could see it. The replacements. The new kids who didn't know how to move under fire yet, getting shredded in that field. He went to Colonel Gruber. "Sir, the eastern approach is a problem. 300 yards of open ground, no cover. They'll have interlocking fields of fire. I'm requesting we adjust the plan. Come in from the northeast. Use the tree line for cover. Hit them at an angle." Gruber looked at the map. "Negative. The timeline doesn't allow it. Northeast approach adds 2 hours. Division wants this town by noon. Sir, if we go straight across that field, I'm going to lose half my company. That's war, Captain. We all lose men. The order stands. 0600 Eastern approach. Colton went back to his company. He gathered his platoon leaders, 3 lieutenants, all replacements, none of them older than 24. He laid out the plan. He watched their faces as they understood what 300 yards of open ground meant. Lieutenant Jim Hargrove, 2nd Platoon, spoke first. How bad, sir? Colton looked at him. He couldn't lie to these men. Bad. Stay low. Move fast. Don't stop. That's all we can do. At 0545, Baker Company formed up. 140 men. Some prayed. Some checked their weapons for the 10th time. Some just stared at the ground. At 0555, Colton stood in front of them. His men were watching him, waiting for the word. He looked at their faces. He saw Danny Whitford in every one of them, young, scared, trusting him to bring them through. And something inside him broke. Not dramatically, not with a scream or a collapse, just a quiet internal fracture, like a bone that had been stressed too many times finally giving way. He turned to his first sergeant. I won't go. Kessler stared at him. Sir, I won't take these men across that field. It's a slaughter. I won't do it. The words hung in the air. 140 soldiers heard their captain refuse to fight. Kessler grabbed Colton's arm, pulled him aside, and spoke in a low, urgent whisper. Captain, don't do this. Not here. Not in front of the men. I've made my decision, Top. You haven't made a decision. You've had a breakdown. There's a difference. Pull yourself together. I'm not breaking down. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in months. That field is a death sentence, and I won't sign it. Colonel Gruber arrived. He'd heard the commotion. One look at Colton's face told him everything. Captain Colton, are you refusing a direct order? Yes, sir. You understand the consequences? Yes, sir. Gruber's jaw tightened. He turned to Kessler. First Sergeant, take command of Baker Company. Execute the attack as planned. Kessler looked at Colton, then at Gruber. Yes, sir. Gruber turned back to Colton. You're relieved of command. Report to the rear. You'll be held pending investigation. Colton didn't argue. He didn't explain. He just unbuckled his pistol belt, handed it to Kessler, and walked away from his company. He didn't look back. The attack went forward at 0600. First Sergeant Kessler led Baker Company across the field. It was exactly as bad as Colton had predicted. They took fire from 3 positions. Men went down in the first 50 yards, but Kessler kept pushing, kept screaming, kept moving. 3rd Platoon found a shallow ditch and used it to flank one of the machine gun nests. They knocked it out. That created a gap. Baker Company poured through. By 0830, they were in the town. By noon, Hammelburg was taken. Baker Company's casualties, 22 killed, 31 wounded, 53 men, more than a third of the company. Kessler survived. Lieutenant Hargrove did not. The report on Captain Colton went up through channels fast. A company commander refusing to fight was serious, not just a disciplinary matter, but a threat to unit cohesion across the entire division. If one officer could refuse and walk away, others might try the same. Division wanted a court-martial. The charge would be cowardice in the face of the enemy, one of the most serious offenses in the military code. In theory, it was punishable by death. In practice, the Army hadn't executed an officer for cowardice since the Civil War, but the conviction alone would destroy a man. Dishonorable discharge. Prison. A lifetime of shame. The case reached Patton within 48 hours. He was at his forward headquarters planning the next phase of the advance into Germany. He had a war to finish. He didn't have time for a broken captain from Connecticut. But he made time. Patton read the report carefully. He read Colton's service record. Normandy, the Bocage, Hurtgen Forest. He read the casualty figures for Baker Company, both in Hurtgen and at Hammelburg. He read Kessler's statement, which was honest and devastating. Captain Colton was a good officer who reached his limit. Every man has one. Patton sat with the file for a long time. Then he picked up the phone. "Bring me the captain." They brought Colton to Patton's headquarters the next morning. The captain looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. He was unshaven, hollow-eyed, and still wearing the same uniform he'd been wearing when he walked away from his company. Patton was sitting behind his desk, ivory-handled pistols on his hips, stars on his helmet, every inch the general. He didn't stand when Colton entered. He just looked at him. "Sit down, Captain." Colton sat. He didn't try to stand at attention, didn't try to present himself. He was past that. Patton studied him for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I've read your file. I know what you did at Normandy. I know what happened in Hurtgen. I know what happened at Hammelburg." Colton said nothing. "You were a good officer. Your men trusted you. Your casualties were below average for your sector. You did your job." "Yes, sir." "And then you stopped doing your job." Colton looked at the floor. "Yes, sir." "Why?" The question sat between them. Not angry, not accusatory, just the question. "Why?" Colton took a long breath. "Because I couldn't watch any more of them die, sir. Not for a field, not for a timeline, not for a town nobody will remember in 5 years. Every town matters. Every objective matters. You know that. I used to know that. I don't anymore." Patton leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Lower. Not the booming Patton voice. Something more private. "In the last war, in 1918, I was hit by a machine gun round. Went right through my leg. I was lying in a shell hole, bleeding, and I could hear my men dying around me. I wanted to stay in that hole. Every part of me wanted to stay down, stay safe, let someone else handle it. You know what I did?" "You got up, sir." "I got up. Not because I'm braver than you. Not because I'm made of something different. I got up because I was terrified of what I'd become if I stayed down. That's the only difference between the man who fights and the man who quits. It's not courage, it's fear of the alternative." Colton looked at him. "With respect, sir, you got hit once. I watched my men die for 6 weeks straight, every day. The same nightmare every single day." "I know. Then you know why I couldn't do it again." Patton stood up and walked to the window. Outside, trucks were moving. Soldiers were marching. The war was continuing without Captain Edward Colton. "Here's what I know, Captain. I know you're not a coward. Cowards don't last from Normandy to Hurtgen. Cowards don't keep their men alive through the Bocage. You're not a coward. You're empty. There's a difference, and the Army doesn't have a word for it. But I do." He turned back to Colton. "You're used up. You gave everything you had. And when the Army asked for more, there was nothing left to give. That's not cowardice. That's arithmetic." Colton's eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. Patton walked back to his desk and sat down. His voice hardened again. Not cruel, but firm. "But here's what you need to understand. 53 men went down taking that town. 22 of them are dead, and they went down without their captain. They went into that field led by a first sergeant because their officer walked away. Those men deserved better. I know. Kessler did your job. He took your company across that field, and he brought back whoever he could. He did what you wouldn't do. I know that too, sir. Do you know that Lieutenant Hargrove is dead? Colton's face changed. Something moved behind his eyes. Pain. Guilt. I didn't know that. No, sir. 23 years old. He was leading his platoon across the field when a mortar round hit. He died doing what you refused to do. Now, I'm not saying his death is your fault. The Germans killed him. But he was out there because you weren't. That's a fact that you'll carry for the rest of your life. Colton put his head in his hands. Patton let the silence hold. Then he spoke again. Division wants to court-martial you. Cowardice in the face of the enemy. They want to make an example. Colton looked up. I understand. I'm not going to let them. Colton blinked. Sir? I'm not going to court-martial a man who fought for 9 months, lost half his company, and broke. That's not justice. That's the army eating its own. I've seen enough of that. Patton opened a drawer and pulled out a document. He'd already prepared it. Here's what's going to happen. You're being transferred to a rear area logistics unit, effective immediately. You'll serve out the rest of the war counting blankets and loading trucks. No combat. No command. You'll receive an honorable discharge when it's over. Your record will note administrative transfer for medical reasons. It won't say cowardice. It won't say court-martial. Colton stared at him. Why? Because you're not the only officer in this army who's reached his limit. You're just the only one who said it out loud. And if I destroy you for being honest about what this war did to you, then every other officer who's barely holding on will learn to keep his mouth shut and stay in command until he gets his men killed through incompetence instead of walking away. I'd rather have an honest man in the rear than a broken man leading soldiers. He slid the document across the desk. But understand this, Captain. You're done. No more command. Not now. Not ever. You quit on your men, and that can't be undone. The army will treat you fairly. History doesn't have to. Colton picked up the document, read it, and signed it. Patton stood. The meeting was over. One more thing, Patton said. Colton stopped at the door. You said you couldn't watch any more of them die. I understand that, but your first sergeant watched them die in your place. Think about that. The weight you put down, somebody else picked up. That's what quitting means. It doesn't make the weight disappear. It just moves it to someone else's shoulders. Colton left without a word. Captain Edward Colton spent the rest of the war at a supply depot near Reims, France. He processed requisitions, signed manifests, and spoke to almost no one. The other officers at the depot knew his story. Rumors travel fast in the army, but nobody mentioned it to his face. He was a ghost, present, but not there. First Sergeant Roy Kessler received a battlefield commission and finished the war as a lieutenant, commanding what was left of Baker Company. He led them into Austria in May 1945, accepted the surrender of a German garrison, and brought his men home. When asked about Colton years later, Kessler said only this: he was a good man who ran out of good. It happens. The war took more from some than others. Colton went home to Connecticut after the war. He went back to teaching. He married. He had children. He never spoke about what happened at Hammelburg. His family knew he'd served, knew he'd been in combat, but the details were sealed behind a silence that no one could break. In 1968, his son came home from college and told him he'd been drafted for Vietnam. Colton sat at the kitchen table, looked at his son, and said something he'd never said to anyone. If you reach a point where you can't go on, don't be ashamed, but know this: someone else will have to go in your place. Make sure that's a weight you can live with. His son went to Vietnam. He came home. He never asked his father what he meant. Patton never mentioned Colton's case again. For him, it was a problem solved. A man removed from a position he could no longer hold, replaced by someone who could. War was full of such moments. Men broke. You either destroyed them or you dealt with them. Patton chose to deal with it. But buried in Patton's decision was something larger, something the Army wouldn't fully reckon with for decades. The idea that a man could fight bravely, serve honorably, and still reach a point where he simply could not continue. That this wasn't cowardice. That it was damage. That the war itself was the weapon that broke him. And punishing him for breaking was like punishing a rifle for jamming after 10,000 rounds. Patton understood this, not because he was soft, he was anything but because he'd seen enough war to know that every man has a limit. The great ones find theirs later than most. The unlucky ones find theirs at the worst possible moment. And the honest ones admit it. Colton was honest. Patton respected that, even as he ended his career for it. Would you have court-martialed Captain Colton, or would you have done what Patton did? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories about World War II and the impossible decisions men faced when the fighting pushed them past everything they thought they knew about themselves, make sure to subscribe.